All right, so I think we're recording now. Welcome everyone to the Mega Alumni Podcast. I believe this is now going to be our fifth episode. And we have Katie again joining us for from Mega. And then we have Dr. Elena Caruthers. I hope I'm saying that name
Caruthers, yeah.
correctly.
You
All
got
right.
it, yeah.
Just a quick introduction about myself. My name is Nehal. I'm a grad student at The Ohio State University in the mechanical engineering department. And as a grad student, we are part of the Grad Association Mega, and we are trying to do this alumni podcast series to hopefully network current students in the department with our alumni. And I'll quickly hand it over to Katie to quickly introduce herself and then move on to our guest.
So hi, I'm Katie. I'm also a mechanical engineering PhD student at OSU, also involved with Mega. And I'm in the neuromuscular biomechanics lab, which is the lab that our guest for today is a graduate from. So Elena graduated with her PhD in I think 2017. Okay.
That's
And
right.
has since been at Otterbein. And she was recently awarded tenure earlier this year. So congrats.
Thank you.
But so she's an associate professor in engineering at Otterbein. So I'll let her add to that. That was sort of just introducing her title.
Yeah.
Add to that.
Yeah, originally from Chicago, and I moved to Columbus specifically to be in Rob's lab, or Dr. System, to work in the neuromuscular biomechanics lab. Did a lot of simulation work with OpenSim, a lot of motion capture work as well. Had a passion for teaching, and kind of told that to Rob from the very get-go. And I'll talk about that more as we have the podcast today. But that kind of led me to want to be at a teaching focused institution, and yeah, I was able to teach at Otterbein and have been there since, and this is my 7th year. It's been challenging, but also really good. It's the job that I wanted, and has been a real blessing. So yeah, I'm excited to share more about that today.
I can ask the first question. Okay.
Yeah.
So I know, sorry, we didn't talk about that ahead of time. So you did your undergrad at Hope, which is
Yes, I
also
did.
a smaller
Mhm.
institution. Did you always know that you wanted to come back to a smaller school, or could you talk about your experience, like learning engineering at a smaller school and then coming to OSU for your grad program and then returning as an educator for a smaller program?
Yeah. Um, so I chose to go to Hope for several reasons. I wanted to stay in the Midwest. I actually double majored in dance and engineering, and that's something that I could do there, which led me down to biomechanics. But I really wanted to be at a small school so that I could have a more individualized education. And I also wanted to go to a religious institution from some personal things that I wanted and saw as a priority. But yeah, I just was able to really develop relationships with professors. Like, they knew me by name, they knew where I was from, they knew if I was struggling with personal things or things at school. And I really appreciated that. And I had had tutoring experience back in high school and knew that I wanted to teach in some capacity. I just wasn't sure how or what that would look like. Um, and so I think just having that more intimate setting of the classroom was something I craved, because as a student, I really appreciated that. Because I did teach at Ohio State for 2 semesters as part of the future faculty program, and I taught a class of 50 and then 100. And that was just very different. And it helped me discern what kind of teaching I wanted to be at for my long-term career. And not saying that one is better than the other, they're just completely different. You know, I only really got to build relationships with the students who chose to come to office hours, whereas where I'm at Otterbein, I force upon the relationship because I know every student, and they equally want to have that relationship too, because that's also why they're paying the money they are to go to a private institution like that. And I also felt like I could just, yeah, I just felt called to be at a smaller school. I'm more teaching driven rather than research driven. That's my own personal thing. And once again, Rob knew that from the get-go, and I really appreciated how he kind of took the lead in developing the future faculty program, because I was in the first cohort for that. And that kind of, once again, helped me discern like what I wanted. Did I want what I wanted in undergrad, or did I want what it was at Ohio State? So yeah, it was just like a really great experience, and we can talk more about that too. But that was kind of the main turning point as to how I kind of chose. Yeah.
All right. Uh, I can go with the next question, and I was just looking at your bio from the Otterbein University page, and I noticed that you just got the Otterbein Advisor of the Year award. This is
Mhm.
for Society of Women Engineers. Uh,
Yes.
so yeah, I was wondering if there's something you can talk about that, what that process was like, how do they hand out these awards, and how does it feel?
Yeah, that was actually a couple years ago, I think.
Oh, okay.
But yeah. I think once again with Otterbein, people know people. And the people that handle those awards just saw how hard I was working to advocate for my students in Society of Women Engineers, ensuring that we had space, money, support, getting student involvement. And I think there was also like student voice as to how those awards are given out as well. And I was completely shocked because the SWE section at the time was very small. Because I believe that was even during COVID. Yeah, that was in 2020, 2021. And so we were really limited in what we could do, but we still made an effort to at least have social and professional development events, even though we couldn't really do community outreach. And I think just that effort was recognized by our student organization leadership. And so that's just kind of how that kind of came about.
Okay.
Yeah.
What, as an advisor, you're the advisor for SWE. So
Mhm.
what, I guess what outreach types of things do you, as an advisor, help SWE with, or what types of events do they do to promote sort of women in engineering, either through K through 12 or for
Mhm.
other people at the university?
Yeah, so I will be transparent in saying our SWE section has now ended because we have not been able to have enough members. Just a lot of Otterbein students are athletes, and that's just really challenging to have, first of all, a class of 20 per class, so like 80 students to come together to have consistent meetings and consistent events. And so we've now morphed that into women in STEM. And so it's not just the engineering students, but those from like math, chemistry, biology. So it's more of a meatier sized group of people to divvy out responsibilities. But at the time when SWE did exist at Otterbein, as far as outreach events, we worked with the Boys and Girls Club for a while. That was early on before COVID. And so they would come to us to have different activities, I believe every other week for at least a few months, where they learned how to code and they learned how to build a circuit. They got to do 3D printing. And I think that's really cool for the students to come. But then we also did the flip reverse where we came to the students. Because I think that's also a challenge with a lot of like STEM outreach is we're asking people to come to us rather than us coming to them, which also requires time and resources on everyone's end. But even to find some students of mine, because it's not my thing. Like, yes, I oversee it, but to find students who are eager enough to do it, to want to do it in the classroom. And so we went to a couple schools around Halloween and we had them like build a circuit and do some different things just to get the students engaged there. Yeah, those are just some couple examples that come to mind right off the bat, but yeah.
Yeah, and I was kind of as you pointed out that the SWE section is kind of now morphed into
Mhm.
just women in STEM. So I was
Mhm.
wondering like what as you've seen this transition and you've been at Otterbein for a couple of years now, as a faculty member and then earlier a student, what advice kind of do you have for uh, women organizations to kind of find that place? And maybe if, like you said, that there are not enough in already existing in that cohort, then how do you expand out and maybe get more people in? Because that seems like a chicken and egg problem. Maybe like you don't have enough
Right,
people
it
right
is.
now. So yeah, I was wondering what kind of thoughts you have on that.
Yeah, and I think I initially struggled with having to let go of what SWE was because it was started, we're a very young engineering department. We're only about 10 years old. And so keeping in mind that at the time when the department started, a third of our class was female. Amazing, even like beating traditional standards. But that class was specifically recruited because it was the first class, and we wanted to ensure that it would be inclusive and diverse and a successful class. Because there's a lot riding on your first graduating class of a new program. And I think just things happen, especially with COVID and just being a smaller institution, our enrollment then started to be more like what you see traditionally across America. It's not that third anymore. And so I had to come face to face with, I can't be an officer. Like, this is not my job. It's the student's ownership. And if they're not excited about it, I don't want to force that. Like, I want them to be able to do what they want to do. And each class is different and unique in its own way. For example, our sophomore class at Otterbein right now, like 75% athletes out of like 25 kids, which is huge. And a lot of that too, recognizing their undergrads and trying to prioritize what to say yes or no to. I feel like COVID made people kind of have a slap in the face of like, what am I actually going to say yes to? Because everything that I say yes to, I'm saying no to something else, or vice versa.
Right.
Yeah, but as far as like how to do that, I think as a faculty member, knowing that I'm older and have had that experience, to talk with fellow faculty members, keeping our students in mind and be like, what is practical for our students and what's going to be beneficial for them? Where we kind of have a more idea of like what their capacity is. Because I know when I was an undergrad, like I said, I double majored in dance and engineering. I minored in math. I wanted to do another minor. And if I were to talk back to my undergrad self, I would have been like, no, no, no. And so I think sometimes, especially at a smaller school, it kind of takes more of a faculty leadership to kind of help guide the students at first, and then they can kind of take it from there. Now, once again, that's at a smaller school like Otterbein. That's, you know, from my own experience. But I'm also blessed to be able to know the faculty and like the biology and chemistry departments, where I see them every other week, if not more. And we're all passionate about our students getting involved. I don't know if that answers your question, but those are some things that come to mind.
No, yeah, sounds good. Yeah, it was a very
Yeah.
open-ended kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Good question. Thanks.
So I had a question about teaching as a female faculty member in engineering. And so how do you balance with students sort of like not seeing you as a pushover and being too nice versus being too strict? I feel like that's something as a female instructor, like especially we sort of like have to deal with balancing those two very different aspects. Do you have advice for that?
Uh, so I will say I had a little bit of dose of reality when I did that future faculty program. So the first semester, no one said anything. We got along. It was awesome. And then my first day of class, second semester, this was when I had over 100 students. I'm going over the syllabus, and a male student raises his hand and basically asks, what makes you qualified to teach us, in front of all the students? And I was very caught off guard by that. And I basically told him, like, I had applied for this job. I had the experience. I expressed the student evaluations I thankfully had from the previous semester. But also my fear was like, he is now planting seeds in everyone else's mind. And then immediately after that class, I went and talked to Rob about it. And he was like, I'm so sorry that happened. If you were male, that probably wouldn't have happened. And I'm just glad I had the prior experience to speak to my skills. It's a shame that I would need to do that anyway, and not just like trust that the university is putting someone that they trust to teach you. But it definitely gave me perspective as I entered my Otterbein job. Because I think I've been in very fortunate situations where my male colleagues have just respected me, or they even look to me for help sometimes. It's not like, oh, it's Elena, like she's not good enough or she's not smart enough. So that was kind of not even that, maybe what the student is getting across, or just like a distrust of some kind. But as far as like the pushover, I think initially my first day of class, I kind of come off a little bit strong. Like, this is the boundary, these are the rules. But that also gets the other part of your question, is like to be too strict. And I would rather start off to be too strict and then kind of loosen the ties rather than vice versa. And I still expose like my personality, like I want to be myself, but I clearly set the expectations high. And I think I've learned less to care what students think of that, which has been hard to let go of because I'm a people pleaser and I just want to make sure my students are happy, but also I need to make sure that they're actually learning the material in a way that they can actually learn, because they need more structure, especially because I teach the freshmen. I teach, the first year students who are really transitioning from high school to college, and a lot of them have not had to do time management or study in the way that is expected of them. And thankfully, I haven't felt any student doubt me or my skills, especially now. And maybe I was just ignorant of that back then, but we were kind of all in the same boat. We were in it together because like it was everyone's first year. Like, this was the first year of electrical. Okay, I'm going to teach the first year of electrical with the first class that's taking it. And it was very like relational, and we could be open with one another, obviously with boundaries, but I think I've just gotten more comfortable in my own skin, and they can think what they think, but I hope that I set a good standard for them because I want them to succeed. Yeah, so that's that. Yeah,
That's a good answer. Yeah, that's
thanks.
helpful.
Mhm.
So related to teaching stuff, do you have other strategies that you use for teaching in the classroom and promoting like an inclusive learning environment, not just for like other females in engineering, but for everyone, I guess, still related to teaching?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just to add on a
Mhm.
little bit to that, because you said that you teach like freshmen, I was
Mhm.
wondering that the kind of courses that you're teaching are also likely going to be a little more diverse. And as they're just getting into the bachelor's degree, like how do you kind of deal with what their high school experiences were also like?
Yeah.
Because that is probably going to be really diverse, right? So yeah,
It
just to add on.
is.
Yeah.
Yes, especially after COVID or during COVID. So in general, I guess I'll speak to my freshman class mostly, because I hope that when my juniors are juniors, they kind of have acclimated and they've had some experiences where I kind of expect there to be a more standard as to where they're starting from. That's not necessarily always true. I know I'm making an assumption, but I'll just speak to my freshman class for now. I would say to be more inclusive, I try to have different environments in which they learn. So whether they're like working by themselves, working with someone near them, or doing like a little bit of group work during class, because some students are a little scared to vocalize answers during class. And that can be anyone, regardless of their race or their gender. It's just personality wise. And I want to make sure they're engaging with the material and to give them space to do that. I also feel like, especially with the freshman class, I have to be more attentive the first few weeks as far as like what students I notice are already struggling, as far as turning in homework on time, showing the class up on time, and just don't seem to be engaging. Like, they're asking a lot of questions after class that it makes me seem like I'm going too fast. So I try to adjust my pace, but I've also have the pleasure of having sometimes a TA in the class, where if there's a handful of students that I feel like need one, it's not like being like, okay, here's the TA for just these 3 students. Like, it's for everyone. And they can have study sessions with that TA outside of class at like 8 p.m. because I'm not going to do that. That's a firm boundary that I have. And there's also lab work. So there's lecture and lab. So our lab components every week, we have students work on projects individually, in pairs, or in bigger groups. And that hopefully helps them master the skill themselves and then get comfortable building relationships with people who are different than them. So I pick their pairs the first semester because they don't know each other. I kind of have an idea of where they are with math placement, with ACT scores, their gender and their race, and I mix people together. I don't have to ensure that people are still learning how to work with different types of people, and to also encourage those students who are excelling or have the potential to excel more based off of their test scores, to help encourage the students that may have a tendency to struggle. But it's also not that student's responsibility to pull them along the way. That's where I kind of come in, obviously, as the professor, to do that. But I like to hope that I have at this point, because this is year 7, a good idea of when help needs to be added in, even if the student doesn't ask for it. And I have to be gentle with that too, because there's things like pride or things like, or just not being comfortable with that. But I'm hopeful that by introducing them to the resources earlier will help them continue using them consistently, whether that's just their freshman year or throughout their entire time. Because sometimes even language is a barrier. And so they can't pick up the language as fast. Or even they haven't had vectors at all before. It's just like it can range from like what kind of experience they've had. And so, of course, I'll invite them to office hours and things like that, but sometimes they're more comfortable with a peer. And so that's why I involve the TAs as well, or to hire an individual tutor. Just because everyone has a different perception of who I am, the help I can offer, because it's their first semester. I mean, I didn't really go to office hours my first semester. Don't tell my students that. But, it's just a different thing. But I would hope that it opens a door for them to succeed. But I also have to realize I can't do the work for them. It's their responsibility. So yeah, that's what I'll speak to with that, unless you guys have any other specific questions.
I had a very quick follow-up. So when you do plan these courses, I was wondering that do you account for any sort of initial buffer weeks where you try to make sure that everyone just comes to this some sort of a uniform standing because of their different backgrounds and knowing vectors, not knowing vectors? Because I guess
Yeah, so in my syllabus, so my first year, I was we have to hit this day, this day, this day, this day. And now, because of COVID and having more experience, I now have built in catch-up days or just purely practice problem days and lecture, where it's a very chill environment. We get to catch up on work or whatever help they need to make sure that by the time we get to that following week, we're and I can't always say we're all on the same page. I can't always promise that. But at least there's been more time dedicated, because also the pace of learning is different between students. And I find that I have to guide them more in test taking strategy and how to study. And so sometimes I use that time to help them. You need to write the problem at the top of the page and then your formula. And then because it just even the way they're thinking is not demonstrated in how they show their work. Just very simple things that I think I took for granted. And I shouldn't call them simple, because it is a challenge for some students. But yeah, I have become more relaxed, which has made me cut out a couple of things or more brief in some topics. Because vectors are, as you guys know, very critical to engineering in general, as well as other principles. And if they don't understand that, then we're in big trouble. And obviously, this is an introductory course. They'll get it more in statics and dynamics, but it's my responsibility to make sure they at least know something. Yeah.
So I was also wondering if you could talk about any other challenges that you feel like women generally face in STEM or academia, imposter syndrome or sort of overcoming things like that.
Sure. I'll speak to imposter first. I think it's natural, unfortunately. But as someone who has been on hiring committees, yes, we look for diversity, but we also look for skill set. There's a rubric we follow. They have to have the degree. They have to have potential in these areas. They have to, meet certain bullet points And then we also look at diversity too. Because if they're not meeting those checkpoints, like if we don't think they're going to be a good teacher, they will not make it here. Like they will not thrive at Otterbein. Like that's the main focus of our institution. And so I guess I would encourage any person, male or female, that when you're applying for a job, yes, diversity is taking consideration, but they're also looking at your skill set and like how you're interviewing, how you interact with the students. And yes, of course, it's valuable to have that diversity. But I didn't really ever feel that I was like the token necessarily. It just so happened that yes, I'm the only female for now in the engineering department at Otterbein. And now I now have a friend named Lane, who is now also a female engineering professor. And it just takes time at a smaller school like that. But it is hard because I'm really great friends with 5 other my grad school friends called the squad. That we would work out together, do wine nights together, and we still text and talk. We're all women in industry or academia and engineering. And so it's just whether we're in academia or industry, we still experience those things. But we know that we have the skill set. It's just a mindset at that point. And I'm hopeful that that will start to dissipate as time continues. But another thing I think is just feeling like at least for me, I feel like I had to say yes to everything. And to be the superwoman and to do it all, which I think is how a lot of women feel. And especially being a younger faculty, I felt like I had to say yes to everything to get tenure, which is not true. And because the department was so young, I didn't have as much mentorship as far as what to choose, as far as especially service. Because I would say 50% of my job is teaching, 30% is service, and 20 is research. That's just how it is at a smaller school, at least right now, because we are on the smaller side. And I felt like I had to say yes to everything. And now looking back at my tenure portfolio, it was a cool experience, but it also made me realize like, oh, I could have said no to these things to dedicate more time to the yeses that I did want to dedicate more time to. Because when you say yes to things, you're saying no to other things, like I mentioned before. Another thing I didn't expect is I feel like students are more emotionally open with me as the female of the department. Not saying they're closed off with the males. I just think they are more free to share personal things or just really hard things going on in their life, which I feel very honored that they are willing to share that because that's a very vulnerable space. But I've also had to learn how to support them, but also point them to those resources that I was talking about earlier and not to take that on as my responsibility. Like if they're in a really difficult roommate situation or a family situation, like I can give them advice, but I can also just guide the conversation to people who are more trained in that area. And yeah, so that's something I did not expect. And I think those are 2 of the main ones, I would say, for now. I'm sure there's more, but yeah. Mhm.
Cool.
Yeah,
Those are all really helpful pieces of advice. I think
Yeah.
I also definitely have the problem of saying yes to everything. So
yeah.
that's good to hear that I
And
shouldn't do
finding a
that.
mentor, it would be really key as
Okay.
a female faculty, even if they're not in engineering, finding someone who is in STEM. Because when I came in, it was Dr. Mike Hudaba, who I believe did one of the podcast episodes, and myself, and then the new chair. And the new chair came in with me. So I was like literally jumping in with the new chair. And so we were learning together, and Mike had only been there for a couple of years. So we were like navigating everything together. And I wish I would have, and thankfully some women did reach out to me. They like took me under their wing and to kind of like protect because we have similar tendencies as women in STEM, like we want to like rock it and do all the things. But I find that their input has really helped me shape my perspective of how I do service and teaching and research. So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And as we were kind of talking about things to do and perhaps things not to do, on a slightly different tangent, I was wondering if there's some other general advice you might have for current bachelor or grad students who are figuring out their next steps, and if
Mm,
you're interested in a teaching focused role,
yeah.
what do you think is the experience that really counts? And as someone who might be on committees that are hiring your faculty, what is
Yeah.
it that you're really looking for? Like, does having any industry experience, any postdoc experience, any of that
Mhm.
matter in a teaching centric or teaching focused role?
Yeah. So the first question, advice for undergrads. I would say fight to develop relationships with faculty and staff or any of your TAs, because those relationships make the experience so much fuller. And you have a consistent person that you can reach out to who may know of other things that can help you as well. And just not being afraid to ask for help. I think it's hard to ask for help. I mean, I struggle with that sometimes too, even as far in my career as I am. And I think just the more that you practice that skill, there's more potential to thrive, I think, because we're not meant to do things by ourselves. And then for graduate students, if you are interested in teaching, if you're at Ohio State, get involved in the future faculty program. That's a wonderful way to get started. But even if that's not something of interest, like just shadowing professors, like that's part of the program, but just doing that on your own, or even emailing professors around the area, like myself, being like, I would love to talk to you. I'd love to sit in on a class, or, just see what your life is like in a day, just to kind of get the reality of what it's like to be a professor. Because even just the classroom is not just our job. And I think that's the part that the future faculty program helped me kind of see, because I got to sit in on like departmental meetings and kind of see the internal workings of the department. And that's something that's obviously a part of my rhythm, like every month. But the more relationships, same message, I guess, for the undergrads, but just being able to connect with people who are actually living the job, and that way you can actually see different ways even institutions do things, compared to Otterbein, or if you want to go to a bigger school like Ohio State, like anywhere in between, the more data you can collect and observation and just perspective you get, I think would be helpful. And to teach, whether you're a TA or to actually teach a class. When I taught, I was under a professor, like we co-taught it, like he had one section, I had the other, but then they let me do the whole thing the next semester. But you get so much experience just learning how to manage your TAs, how to manage the lesson planning with the quizzes, with the exams, and how to divvy out the grading. And it's just a lot, but it's fun, I promise. For those of us that are crazy enough to like it. And then as far as your last question, when you're actually applying for faculty jobs, I would say, having now been through a few searches, I want to be transparent. I did not do a postdoc or have industry experience. I just like dove right in because the opportunity was there for my dream job and I took it. But at least at Otterbein right now, we look for more people that have industry experience because industry is rapidly changing. And our view and mission in our department is to create curriculum that is realistic and hands-on, and to create community relationships with industries around the Columbus area or even out of state. And so we want faculty members to be able to speak to their experience, to how they teach the curriculum. So students see the reality and the weight of engineering. Like, this is a responsibility. And like, you need to know this stuff. It's not just like memorizing a formula and knowing how to like plug in numbers. Like, being off by a factor of 10 could be life-threatening, or, whatever that might be. And having someone to speak to their experience, I think, helps us students see the significance of the class that they're taking. But I think that postdocs can still be valuable. None of us have had postdocs in the engineering program, but I've seen other departmental faculty members do that, especially like biology and chemistry have done that. And I think it just depends on the discipline, because engineering, it's easier, I think, to pull people from industry to go in academia. It may not be as easy for other disciplines. And so postdocs are more natural for chem and bio. Yeah, so that's just my 2 cents. Once again, I did not have either. But as someone who's hired people, we've really valued the industry experience for sure. yeah.
Could you talk a little bit? So you talked about teaching at OSU. I think you taught mechanics and
I
materials.
did,
Is
yes.
that, yeah, Rob talks about it. That's how I know.
Yeah.
Do you still teach mechanics and materials, or could you talk about like the types of classes that you teach at Otterbein, and if you've
Yeah.
had to learn new skill sets or become
Mhm.
uncomfortable like teaching classes in a smaller department and
Yeah.
to new areas that need to be filled?
Yeah, that's a great question, Katie. So I was actually, it's, the end of finals week, I'm cleaning out my office and I stumbled upon like my first lessons plans from when I taught the mechanics and materials class. It was just kind of like, whoa, like a time warp. But I do not teach mechanics and materials. When I first got the job, I was asked to teach the freshman, the fundamentals program, and to teach electrical systems. Now, my degree is in mechanical engineering with a biomechanics research focus. But I was asked to teach electrical, and so I said yes, of course. And thankfully, my dad this will be his 50th year working at Motorola as an electrical engineer. And so I was able to have an in-house resource to see like what is practically needed to teach these students electrical engineering. And of course, I used like my undergraduate materials to help supplement that. But I very much felt like a fish out of water. But it actually has become my favorite class to teach. It's a part 1 and a part 2 class. Part 1 I had an undergrad, part 2 I had never had before. Part 2 is more focused on like power and motors, 3-phase power, that kind of stuff. And I had never gotten that as a mechanical engineer when I was at Hope. And so I think I used the skill sets that I had in mechanics and materials, learning how to use online resources wisely, because not everything is trustworthy, as you guys know. And to also go back to my teaching philosophy that I formed in the future faculty, which was, okay, what are the learning objectives rather than just going to the specific class day and kind of trying to funnel it in that way. And just talking to other teachers, like what was it like to teach a class that was kind of outside your comfort zone and getting advice from them. Because we're all asked usually at a smaller school to do something that is not in our expertise, but I think that makes it unique because we get to learn with the students and to have this like humbleness, like we don't know everything and that's okay. And we can like learn it together. And that's the really beautiful thing that I've been able to still at this day, like there are questions my students will ask me and I don't know the answer and that's okay. And we can just dig in it together. Yeah, and for the engineering class, like, or the engineering fundamentals class, like I had to learn Arduino and like learn SolidWorks because I learned another 3D design software. So I was very much a student my first couple years, which made the job harder, but it also made the job really fun because I like to be challenged. If I were to be doing the same thing every year, which at this point I have, but it keeps on developing more and more as I get more comfortable with this material that I originally didn't know as much compared to like mechanical content. But yeah, it's been a whirlwind. I mean, I love it though. It's been a great experience. And I've gotten to develop like a biomechanics elective, which has been really fun because we have a motion capture lab now on campus, which is great. And it just helps the students kind of enter my world a little bit more and to kind of help them problem solve in a very different context rather than like designing motors or gears or like the human body. It just like has a different, context for them to look at how engineering can be used. So yeah, I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, it does. Definitely.
Yeah, and I was kind of because you brought in some of your research topics, and as your course is kind of based off of that, I just wanted to maybe switch gears and
Yeah,
talk a little bit about the kind of work that the research that you did while you were at OSU, and then kind of continuing on, I suppose, a little bit
yeah,
right now.
yeah.
Uh, and the fact that you mentioned that you did a dance major as well, and so
Mhm.
did that bring about certain kind of interest in body motion, and then
Mhm.
that led to like another like biomechanics kind of
Yeah, yeah, it
interest?
did.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, no, go ahead. Yeah, that was
Um, And when I was an undergrad, I initially thought I was going to major in chemistry, because I thought I wanted to go to med school or become a pharmacist or something. And then I got to organic chemistry, and that was a huge no. I took one semester, and then the second semester didn't do so hot. I actually didn't even finish the second semester. And that it was in that year that I did a lot of research online with my parents, and we eventually stumbled upon biomechanics. So I was really interested in like movement and helping people, because that's like the part of like medical school. But I didn't want to become a medical doctor. And so I remember even vividly being in a statics class, and there was a question about like an arm holding a rock and how much force is this muscle producing? Very, statics question. But that excited me, and that kind of perpetuated, oh, let's like consider biomechanics way more heavily now. And so regardless of what discipline I wanted, I knew I'd have to go to grad school, because Hope only offered like the very general engineering. So of course now they have a biomedical engineering degree. But at the time, they only had like mechanical, electrical, civil, like the very basic ones. And so regardless, I'd have to go advance my knowledge. And so that's also the ties of like, well, if I'm gonna do that, I might as well just go for the PhD, because that's my personality. I am very much an achiever. I knew it, I wanted to teach, and I didn't really want to teach high school or younger. So I was like, well, I guess I'm gonna teach college. And so it was that merging of dance and engineering that eventually helped me see, oh, like I can like do cool stuff with this, because dance was always going to be on the table for me when it came to college. Like I wanted that to be part of my life, because it was a huge, huge part of my life from being in kindergarten all the way through. And I didn't know what STEM science that was going to be to partner it. Because at Hope, they very firmly believe like, yes, we train dancers, but we also want to have them have another discipline to ensure like, we as dancers, we can't dance forever. Like our bodies are limited, and we want to ensure that our people have a career ahead of them, whether that's, dance education or starting their own business. But I chose engineering, which I was one of the very few to do that. And I got to work in a motion capture lab, and I got to see like, once again, the joint of like movement with engineering, and that really excited me. And so I eventually went to some seminars at Hope where they welcomed back alumni, and one of them was Becky Lathrop, and she was working in Rob's lab, and she was doing biomechanics work, and I was like, this is what I want to do. And so it was through that conversation that I eventually got connected to Rob, and all the things happened for me to get to Ohio State, which was a huge blessing. And when I was at Ohio State, I did like a lot of simulation work, musculoskeletal things related to like sit to stand, stair climbing with young and older adults. And I'm still passionate about those populations and those movements. I'm just taking it with a different twist, because now, one, I'm working very closely with the Health and Sports Sciences Department at Otterbein. We have now formed to create a Biomechanics Institute, where we have a motion capture lab, and they have some master's students, and we have students collaborate on different projects for research, but also they have their classroom space in there too. Like I take my biomechanics class in there. They take their freshmen, their sophomores, whoever that they want to teach about like anatomy, movement, analysis, whatever that might be. And I remember having a conversation with Rob when I had first started. I'm like, how do I do this? Because the caliber of research when you're a grad student is different than when you're an undergraduate. And I just had to learn how to shift my expectations and what the learning objectives were, because I treat research as just like another classroom. And so I had to realize the limited resources that I had. Like we are not as funded as Ohio State is, clearly, but we still have the gift of the motion capture lab. And like, how can we make use of that to still have undergraduate students have a valuable research experience, and to also give the opportunity to collaborate closely with someone who's in a different field. Like we are very fortunate to have a school that's very much about interdisciplinary work. And there was one day when we were doing data collection for a research study of mine, and I saw my engineering students at the computer. I saw the health and sports science students as like helping like with the surveys and like getting the markers on. And it was just like this beautiful thing that we'd envisioned since creating this Biomechanics Institute. And to see like undergraduates doing this, Like that was just like a huge thing for me to like see, because it takes a lot of resources to even build up a lab. That was another thing. When the lab was there, things were rocking and rolling. There was already a pipeline for how things were done, but now I had to create that pipeline from scratch. There were no motion capture cameras when I was there. Like I helped purchase them. I helped, get them set up and calibrated, teaching my health and sports science colleagues how to use them. So it's just like a whole new way, but that's another part of why this job excited me, is because I got to start stuff from scratch, just like I did with curriculum. So yeah, and I usually mentor 3 to 4 students in research, and what that looks like, I make it up to the student. I'm not going to force them to do an honors thesis project. If they can only help me out for a semester, that's their choice, because I don't have the time to pull students into something that they don't want to do, because I have too many other responsibilities in teaching 2 lectures and 2 labs every semester, and all the grading too, and committee work. There's a lot more than what, you would see Ohio State professor, or just our schedules and commitments just look different. And so that was a mind shift, but I'm getting there. It's still a learning process for sure, because each student you mentor is different. And Rob let me mentor, research students. He had me like work with some of the juniors and seniors that kind of help give me that perspective, but still it's different when you are actually the person, the PI, and also teaching. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So are your research questions more sports-based now, or are they still about activities of daily living? Sorry, that's just kind of a random question.
No, it's a mixed bag.
Okay.
I say my personal stuff is activities of daily living.
Okay.
But sometimes I'll have students, and I'm kind of learning this right now, like how far do I take it? Because I do want my students to pursue things they're interested in. So I had one student do a baseball study. Like he looked at bat ball swing, and we're having some other health and sports science students look at pitching. So we want to kind of keep the diversity there. But as far as like where I channel more of my energy is still in activities of daily living, but also making use of the clinical perspective that I have. Not that that wasn't there, obviously at Ohio State it is, but involving more of the students and like helping form that and be the ones helping this, rate the subjects as they're doing different things and things like that. So definitely activities of daily living. But I'm hopeful that it'll continue to branch out, because we just got our force plates installed like this past year. So, it's just like a very incremental process. So we're just doing with the space with what we can and still having our students learn, which is the whole objective. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was also at the same time keeping track of time a little bit, and I want to be respectful of your time. So
Oh, yeah.
I know that we kind of had it scheduled till like maybe 5 more minutes, but
Oh, yeah,
I
please. Yeah.
I think we have, Katie, we have like 2, 3 more questions. Do you think we have time to go through them, or uh do you want to end now?
Oh, I'm great.
Okay.
This is great. I love this. Yeah.
All right. All right. Yes, I think the next thing that we kind of had on here was a little bit was as Katie kind of congratulated you right early on
Yeah.
getting tenure.
Mhm.
What was that process like? I know Dr. Hudeb also joined us for an episode before. He touched on it a little bit, and
Yeah.
as to what the process is like in Otterbein. But yeah, what was your experience like?
Yeah. I would say personally, and Rob knows this too, I'm an overachiever. So I think I I struggle with knowing like what I needed for tenure necessarily. Not necessarily for scholarship, but it was more so for service, and more so for service, because I'm going to teach, like that's regardless, like I know I'm going to put in my best effort, but service was more of like the question mark. And so we have like an interim tenure review, which was happened at the end of year 3, where you basically come up with your tenure portfolio, but only at that point, where you talk about your teaching, your research, and your service, professional development, all that stuff. And after that portfolio, they give you comments. And so one was like, hey, you're doing a lot of service. And like we encourage you to like reconsider like how you're forming your time, especially as you're developing scholarship. And so that's something that I still struggled with because I have now since been able to review other people's portfolios for tenure. Now that I'm tenured, I can kind of look at that. And I just see how much service I have compared to other people. But I also have to realize we're a smaller department, and that's just part of the nature of being of a smaller department. We also just went through accreditation, so that's like a large part of our service as well. So I would say having those checkpoints was super helpful to have that, to be like, okay, I have the green light in these areas, but I should be wary of this because they didn't want me to burn out because burnout is a thing, especially for young faculty working at a smaller institution where we just had COVID be a thing. And so they were really wary of that. And so basically it was the same process again, but for realsies this time, where I made my portfolio and there were 3 committees that looked at it along the way, departmental and then personnel, and then eventually the provost. And I felt very confident turning in my portfolio because I felt like I had done the job I needed to do based off of also feedback from my colleagues. Because even I know like teaching evaluations, is that like a thing? Like, yes, it's weighted in the teaching pie, but you also have to have letters from like colleagues to support you. You have to have documents of your exams, your homeworks, your projects, different things like that, as well as having a narrative about the pillars of teaching. There's 5 of them, and we have to speak to each of them to see, because students are going to have their opinion about a teacher, and they're sometimes biased, and we can't always trust them. I think they're sometimes informative, but I think it's confusing for them like to perceive niceness or flexibility to maybe an unhealthy level to be like, that's an awesome teacher. Not saying that we can't be flexible, but I think there also needs to be structure and rigor. And sometimes students don't always perceive that as good teaching. So the university considers that in consideration with the other pieces that I talked about of that pie. Because I know sometimes people worry about that. Because I've gotten some weird evaluations, y'all, even at Ohio State. It's just, you just don't know. But it's all good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely had a couple of them being a GTA in the department too. So yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I think I just have like one last
Yep.
question. You talked
Yeah.
about um teaching and service being evaluated, and research is a smaller percentage of your time at Otterbein.
Mhm.
Is there a certain number of papers or conferences that you're like expected to go um to like hit the research tenure mark?
Yeah, so there's a scholarship statement for each department, and each department has to get that approved by the university or some committee that's in charge of that. And so for engineering, we have 2 different categories of scholarship things. So category A is like getting a peer-reviewed article accepted. It doesn't even have to be published because you guys, as you know, publishing can sometimes take a while. Whereas category B might be like, I presented at a conference. And I believe there's, can even publish something in a book, whatever that might be. But we had to hit 3 artifacts in those 2 categories, with 1 at least being in category A. So I had at least 2 peer-reviewed articles, and I did not have to be primary author on all of them. I mean, I was, and I had supplementary, but they just want to see that you're active in your scholarship. Because I did have some stuff when I was in Rob's lab, and I've done some stuff related to more engineering education, I would say, that would still count in the pocket of scholarship and they also call it creative work as well. And once again, each institution is going to be different, but I would hope that schools are consistent in having a scholarship statement for the department, because it's going to change from like us to philosophy to health and sports sciences or English. And so sometimes it's hard to measure, but that's, we at least have one for each discipline. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Mhm.
And I think that was everything that we wanted to cover. So thanks a lot for joining us
Yeah.
and sharing all of that information. My usual kind of wrap up question for the guest is that what kind of advice would you want to share with uh, current grad students who are probably like just starting off versus someone who's maybe somewhere in
Mm,
the middle of the program versus someone who is like very close to graduation, like
yeah.
recalling your time as a grad student, what would
Mm.
you want to share? Uh,
Yeah, I love this question. It's like giving me a flashback to the past. I would say for early graduate students, um, just keep asking questions. Just keep asking questions, whether that's to your peers in your lab or to your advisor or whoever else you're working with. For mid-career graduate students, I would say try to develop healthy boundaries with your work and trying to create healthy patterns for yourself, because that's going to influence how you develop your career outside of that going forward. And then I would say for those who are about to graduate, I think just to take pride and joy in all the work that you've done. I remember my defense day being one of the best days of my life. It's still like one of the top three, and also seeing Taylor Swift in concert. But but I would, yeah, just encourage you to kind of reflect back and then also just be open-handed as you think about the future. But just being confident that you have the skill set and you can, yeah, just do the things that you set your mind to by just advocating for yourself, and looking for those opportunities.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that advice. And I think
Yeah.
the since you mentioned that the couple of good things, like the highlights that you had, like even for example just going to a concert, do you
Yeah.
think like during your PhD, and I think this is as a current grad student speaking and interacting with other grad students, do you think there is some more of like fun stuff that you think you should have done while your PhD
Mm.
was going on? Any advice on that?
Yeah, I mean, I really credit Rob because he really set a healthy tone for what he expected of his graduate students. Like he wanted us to live a life. And he wanted us to see family during the holidays or wanted us to go on vacations or spend time with friends because he did the same. And so my squad, my girls, that, we would have wine night every Wednesday. We would work out together most of the week. And I really felt like I got to thrive with that group. I'm also really heavily involved in my church. So I just was very community driven, and I'm a very people oriented person. And I know not everyone's that way, but I really felt like because of Rob's leadership, I was able to have that example so that I could do that for myself. Um, and if that's unfortunately not what your situation is, I would try to seek people who can like support you in developing those patterns, or even how to even start, like what does that practically look like? But yeah, I really felt like I got to live my life. I mean, I wanted to stay in Columbus because of that experience. And I think that speaks to, yeah, just what I had at Ohio State was really, really precious. So yeah.
Sounds great.
Mhm.
And hopefully, I think this resonates with the people viewing the episode. And this is something that I guess Mega is also trying to do with a lot of our different social events. And hopefully, we can get more people
Yeah.
engaged in our Mega events.
Yeah. Of
Well,
course.
uh, just before we end the recording, is there anything you would like to share, like your LinkedIn profile or anything else with our viewers?
Yeah. If you guys just want to look me up on LinkedIn, Elena Caruthers, you'll find me. Elena, and then Caruthers, Caruthers. I'm more than happy to connect, answer questions, meet up for coffee. Yeah, but I just really love building those relationships and getting to hear your stories, and we'll share mine. So yeah, thanks for having me. This is great.
Thank you for joining us. And
Yeah,
yeah, I'll go ahead and even put in the link in the YouTube description of your LinkedIn profile.
yeah,
For all the other viewers, you will also have social media links for all of our other handles like Instagram, our website,
yeah.
LinkedIn page. So please feel free to connect with Dr. Elena Caruthers as well as
Mhm.
Mega. And yeah, thank you for coming.
Of course, thank you.
Right.